You're listening to 515, the Ultra Podcast, the show that invites you into the lives of people who make up the Ultra family. Here's your host for these conversations, Larry Ryan.
Thanks, MJ. Hey, listeners, this is a special episode to provide you with a race recap for the 2023 Australia. My next regular episode will be released next Friday, June the 2nd, with my Ohana guest, Armando Armellini. As regular listeners know, the Australia took place last weekend, and some amazing stories have come out of that race. Today, I will be joined by some of the story makers, but first we are going to hear from everyone's favorite announcer, Steve King, who was down under at the event. Welcome back to the show, Steve.
Hey, thank you very much, Larry. It's always good to be with you.
I'm going to be speaking to each of the champions in this episode, along with the first man to complete 6 515 events in a 12-month span. And Steve, I'm sure that you have some great comments about each of the winners and that as well. But 515 does celebrate all of its participants. What are some of the other storylines out there that unfolded in Australia that you can share with us as a recap for the race?
Well, one of the good things is we had 43 starters, 39 of whom actually finished within the 12-hour limit each and every day. So sadly, there were 4 people who didn't quite make it. And one of those people, of course, was the gentleman who was hosting what was the sub-20 challenge, and that was Richard Thompson, a previous champion in Australia, a 2-time world champion, a 2-time winner of the Ultra 355, and certainly right up there as a pre-race favorite along with Simon Cochrane. And unfortunately for Richard, just prior to the event, he didn't inform us of this until afterwards, but he was suffering from bronchitis and he had put in so much work. So it speaks volumes that he actually still was able to swim a 2:47 and rode a 4:13. He was off the bike at 7:01 on the end of day one. And that put him in second position. And he went out for a ride the next day, the big ride. And unfortunately had to drop out, and he was leading along with Steve Ledger at that point. And it was tragic, really, when you think of the time, energy, money, and everything you put into that. It put a lot of pressure on himself with this event. However, he has to take credit for setting that up. A lot of people never thought it would be possible. You have people like Carl Reed, a 2-time winner, who thought maybe it's possible. And he was the one who sort of really talked to Simon about getting involved in that race. So a lot of kudos to Richard. We also had Nathan Stewart, who had to drop. And unfortunately, Nathan, who had led previously day one, previous year, and ended up 3rd overall, but he too had to drop out on day number 2. He was suffering on the bike. And it came down to the run for 2 others, Kylie Jones, who had attempted before. She carried on, though, and ended up finishing in 12 hours, 47 minutes, so became a participant. Mm-hmm. And we certainly wish her all the best because she was a 3-time breast cancer survivor as well. And we were hoping to see the first ever Maori Kiwi to finish an Ultraman distance event. And that was in the form of Steve York. And he got through the first 2 days just fine, but really struggled on the run. And yet he too continued valiantly and ended up on the run course for 14 hours, 45 minutes. So those are 2 of the sad stories. The final finisher and the winner of the longboard as a final champion was Siddhartha Yadav. And he was our final person off the bike on day number 1. He was, I think, around 11:45 or so on day number 2. And then he was the final person at the finish line on day 3 at 11:52. So our congrats to him. We had Kaz Sewell as well, who was the final female to finish. She was the final athlete of the day when it came to the swim. And at the end of day 1, she was the final athlete day 2, but then a very good run to wrap up her day. And it was someone else who had a great story, and it was so pleasing to see so many people come along and give it everything they had out there. I think of some of the other people. We had another 20-year-old. It's the second time a 20-year-old from India has done the race. Avdut Shinde is the person, a great performance for him. And at that age, it's quite incredible. We had Sean Perro coming back for a third time, doing random acts of ultra, as he called it. So there was a lot of excitement, a lot of first-timers. I was very pleased. We had someone like Lanny Bullen who missed by 1.5 kilometers on the run last time. This time she did finish comfortably and had some problems on the bike, but gutted it out to the line. And so we were just delighted. And you mentioned Shane Duffy, of course. What a story that is. And I won't go into too many details there, except he had that bike crash a few days just before the event. The bike was just smashed to pieces, but it was actually Richard Thompson who was kind enough to give him a brand new bike to ride. So a lot of great stories out there. Mm-hmm. A lot of emotional stories too. Kelly Wright, who was a third place female, she'd been previously a gymnast, but one of two athletes coached by a former world champion in the form of Kate Bevilacqua, and she's won in Australia, Canada, where she beat all the men as well as going to the Big Island to win the world championship. So it was thrilling all around. I am so pleased to see James Scanlon doing another one. Remember, he's done Arizona as well as Florida. Has done very well, had a very good run once again. A newcomer pretty much is our third placer, Matt Thompson. It surprised me. Here's a guy who did his first 70.3, I think 2019, did around 7 hours, did one Ironman, did 10:03, and he came away with a third position overall. And Steve Ledger, what a great surprise he was, because he was like 16th out of the swim. And talking about that, though, James Scanlon, once again, he ended up in sixth position, but he was 36 out of the swim, and yet it was a PB for him. So, again, these things happen. And when you saw the devastation of the records that happened out there, we saw the second and third fastest swims, Simon Cochrane. Warren Keegan was the other one. And so we were very pleased. We saw a record on the bike course on day one with the first person going sub 4 hours. We saw a record by, I think, 19 minutes, 24 seconds at the end of day one from Simon Cochrane. And then the battle at the front on the bike. I mean, the bike course records previously for day two, Richard Thompson had held that with a 7:42.42. Well, Steve Ledger managed to ride in at 7:14.24 with Simon Cochrane at 7:18.30. So they demolished the previous record and demolished, at least Simon did the added day one and two times when you add them up. So we saw blistering times. I think 33 minutes, 36 seconds was the time taken off of that record. There was total bike times when we had the two bike times up for the 2 days. Richard Thompson had held that 11:45, where 30 minutes was taken off that time by Simon and 20 minutes by Steve Ledger. And then it came down to the run, and what a run it was. As we know, to go sub 20 hours, he would have had to do 6 hours and about, I think, 6:17 and 20 seconds was the time we were looking at. And he ended up doing a 6:06.07. So when you look at him going through the 21-hour mark and then blistering through the 20-hour mark, he knocked an hour 32:27 off the previous Australia record and set a world best 19:48.47. So a remarkable day. And it was so good to see Dee Fuller having competition as well. Ricky Anderson was a wonderful performer, and she had a great time on day two by setting the bike course up for the women. And she was also the leader in the swim for the women until Dee took her on the bike. And so things changed quite a bit, and Dee had a great run to take the title.
Yeah, and we'll be speaking with Dee and Simon coming up, as I said. Now, Steve, I understand the conditions were not very favorable down there with the rain, and there was also some road construction and whatnot. Do you think that there was even more time left out there for Simon?
Possibly, but Simon was one of the lucky ones in terms of there was a roadblock at one point that you stopped for 10 minutes. Now, when we got there, there had been a group of 5 together, but one of that group slightly dropped off the pace, and that was James Scanlon. So we sat behind him, and it was great to see how legit everything was. He just sat and waited on his bike for 10 minutes before get going again. So some frustration, but again, it adds a little incentive. But the weather, in fact, even though it was pouring down with rain at a point and it was quite windy, it didn't seem to affect them. On the run, it certainly did for the people that were out there for 9 to 12 hours and more.
Yeah. And now that this sub 20 has been broken, what do you think is going to happen next? Do you think there's just going to be a bunch of people doing it? Is this going to be like the 4-minute mile?
Well, when you think of what they've got to do, an average of 6 hours, 40 minutes a day, it's extraordinary. Simon, I think, had the perfect storm going on for himself in the most positive way. He had an incredible crew. He was fit. He was confident. He had the great advice from Carl Reed. He knew what the people before him had done. So I think it's going to be possible, obviously, because some of the pros out there can go the distance and they're not intimidated by the distance. But maybe for many of them, it will be the first time that they'll have a crew with them, and the crew is so valuable. I certainly think it would be great to see a match up with Maxim Yazhev and himself. And I'd love to see Richard Thompson get out there again, and Carl Reed. I would love to see those guys all go head to head. And I would think that Simon setting the benchmark as a pro triathlete too, it's going to really make others think, because it looks good to have a world title on your resume, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And when you think in the women's division, Kate Bevilacqua, of course, who's done incredible things. I would point out there was, as well as the age group records that we saw from Simon, obviously, and Stephen Ledger, we also saw an age group record in the women's 50 to 59 division. A lady called Tess Prince knocked about 40 minutes almost off the time from Charlie Llewellyn, the Canadian who did the race in 2015.
Excellent. So were there any stories out there that you saw unfold that just shocked you completely, or was there anything out there that brings to mind the Ohana Kokua Aloha?
There was a lot of that going on. I mean, there was so much help. There was a great crew, a gentleman representing the Basque Country, Bernat Oliveira. He was such a good guy and such a great crew, and they seemed to have made friends with pretty much everybody out there. I think you look at, it was great to see a brother, Warren Keegan. He was out there, and 2 years earlier, his brother Andrew had finished the race. So you've got lots of team stuff happening out there, lots of support when anyone ran into trouble. We had a couple of people go off course and didn't struggle with the idea of getting back onto it. There was a Jamie Schubert. He was a gentleman who admitted and acknowledged that he had a lifetime of addiction behind him. And yet he and his friend, who had also had that sort of a lifestyle, really raised their game. And the attitude, I think that was it. He was one of those people who went, I think, 25 kilometers long on the bike. You can imagine what that does to your spirit. But again, when people came in, they were happy. They were talking about it being one of the best events you could imagine. The speeches at the end all spoke to that as well. So we were really thrilled with the outcomes.
Excellent.
And there is one other as well, if I may, because we saw some amazing stuff. There are people who were raising funds for different things. One lady was raising funds for cystic fibrosis. And in this race, we believe the first ever gentleman with cystic fibrosis completed the Ultraman. That was Rory Morgan. So again, amazing stuff going on.
Yeah, those are the amazing stories that keep bringing people back to these 5:15 races again and again, and like you and me for sure. Now, you've only been back for a short time from the race, and I know you already did another race since you've been back here, and you have some other stuff going on in your regular personal work life that I would like you to maybe tell us about as well. You got a new app coming out.
We do in the next couple of weeks. Thank you for bringing that up. The Detachment Technique, which is a technique I came up with years ago that I've finally put together for others to learn. We've got a website, detachmenttechnique.com, and we're coming out with an app. It will be a free app. And my hope is it will help anyone who's got PTSD or is suffering in any way with anxiety, depression, and PTSD. And even though we've made it primarily for first responders, it is also just as good for any member of the general public.
That sounds excellent. Thank you
I would say,
Yep.
sorry, Larry, I would say this as well, and I really appreciate you bringing that up because during the course of what happened, the speeches at the end, as you're well aware, Dee Fuller spoke to it, but there were also two gentlemen who dedicated their races to people they've lost through suicide, one who had lost his son, one who had lost his brother. And when you look at the countries people come from, creating this family of ultra people, we had two brand new countries represented. One, as we said, the Basque country, which is obviously between Spain and France. I mean, it's the people who speak the Basque language, but it's also, we had a gentleman representing Botswana, Sean Wrigley. So it was nice to see an African country getting involved as well.
Yes, that's amazing. Yeah. All right. Well, Steve, thank you for the recap of the race. I'm now going to go and speak to those champions and catch up with my friend Shane Duffy as well. So everybody stay tuned to that. And Steve, thanks once again. We'll be talking to you again shortly.
You bet. Thanks very much, Larry.
Joining me now after his very busy year of traveling the world competing in 6 5:15 races is my friend Shane Duffy. Welcome back, Shane.
Good to be back, Larry.
Firstly, I'd like to speak to you about the most recent event that you did down at Australia. You bookended your tour of races that you started 12 months ago in Australia. You finished it in Australia again. After getting through the first 5, you actually almost didn't finish the 6th one. And in fact, you almost didn't start the 6th one. Can you tell us what happened when you were getting ready to start on race number 6?
Larry, we got up to Noosa in preparation on the Sunday night before the race. Monday, everything kind of got unpacked and bikes got put back together. Tuesday, my bike was booked in for an inspection, so I decided to take it out for a quick ride because they weren't open until 9 a.m. And I went down to near the turnaround for the 3rd day for the run, and then come back and drop the bike off. And on the way back, coming through Coolum on part of day 2 course, I was riding through the town there, and a car had kind of missed a turn, and he was new, or wasn't sort of local to the area, and the passenger said, "Oh, that was the turn," and he kind of turned across me, and he turned onto the wrong side of the street and cut across, and I went sort of under the car, or the bike went under the car, and I was trying to hang on and not go under the car.
And what kind of injuries did you and your bike sustain?
Well, the bike was totaled. I was sort of laying on the ground there initially and doing the old, my toes are moving, my legs are moving, my arms, I can move around, you're kind of doing that analysis of yourself. People were like running from different parts of the street and screaming out, and I stood up, and then I had people saying, "Sit down and get off the road and do this," and grab his bike, and there was a bit of chaos there for a couple of minutes. But at the end of it, I felt like I could move my fingers. I went, okay, this is good. I can still do stuff, but my hands and my shoulder and my jaw were quite sore at the time.
Mm. And what took the brunt of the accident for you? What did you hit first? Was it the road or the car, and what part of your body?
First of all, it was me and my shoulder into the side of the car. As I say, the gentleman turned onto the wrong side, and then he kind of kept on sort of turning hard to get back to the right side of the road. Mm-hmm. So initially, as I seen the car turning, I'm like, shit, I tried to turn into the left, but then he kind of kept coming across further. I thought I might have been able to avoid it because it was relatively low speed. I was sort of freewheeling through the town, mm-hmm. making myself big. I'm not in aero or anything. and you're trying to kind of think what the driver's going to do. He's kind of gone past the point where you would turn on the street, so I'm comfortable to start pedaling again. And then all of a sudden, it was this radical movement across me. So I didn't want to put my hand out because I'm mindful of, like in a fall or stuff like that, having an arm out or a wrist out that could get broken. So it was kind of shoulder into the car, the back of my hand onto the car. It has happened to me once before in Noosa, actually, and I was able to hold the mirror and hold myself and my bike up. But the position that the car come across, there was nothing to grab. So, yeah, it was just one of those things. I was just trying to keep everything initially from going under the wheel where my bike went, if that makes sense. So I didn't know at the time because it wasn't like visual until I got the bike inspected, but the handlebar or the left sort of handlebar was snapped, and that's sort of took the most brunt. So my hand was between the handlebar and the road as the bike went over. So and then as the bike kind of went under the wheel, I kind of then, as the car drove off, I kind of like flipped back the opposite way, if that makes sense. So I first went to the left and then went in the air and to the right. So I'm sure it was pretty funny sight for people watching.
Spectacular, yeah. So your bike is not rideable. You're still a couple of days out from the race. Did you consider packing it in? Your body's beat up.
No. Never. I mean, listen, I'm an optimist, I guess. So I was. I didn't want to go to the hospital because I was thinking to myself, well, if I go to hospital and then they say there's something wrong, they may not let me race. So my first port of call was to see Gail, and she's put me together for the other 5 races, and I was just fingers crossed that she could do it again.
Yeah, and Gail's your friend who gives you your post-race massages and gives you your physio and stuff like that, right?
Correct, yeah. So, I mean, there's been plenty of races where I hadn't thought, a couple of days out that I was going to be able to either run or do certain things, and she's been able to put me back together and get things to work that weren't working. So I was just, if I could have crossed my fingers at the time, my fingers were going to be crossed that she could do it again.
Yeah. So you've ended up with a little bit of like probably nerve damage or something in your arms. They're all swollen. How does that affect your ability? Oh, well, hold on. Wait a second. Before we talk about that, how did you get a bike now for the race?
Well, we took the bike back, and it was, the guys who were going to inspect it, after they kind of had words with me about what the hell were you thinking riding, a couple of days before the race, you should know better. You guys keep doing this. This is always happening to you people.
It is true. It is true.
Just any more work. Yeah. So they reached out to their contacts. They said, look, there's no chance. I mean, they're struggling to get bikes and parts as it is for their customers, and with a couple of days up our sleeve, that was not going to happen. Yeah. I tried a couple of stores in Sydney that I deal with all the time and got the same answer. So, sort of Hail Mary kind of gesture, I went, well, I know Richard Thompson is sponsored by Cervelo, and we both ride the same bike. I just reached out to him and explained what had happened. And, he came back to me within 10 minutes, first of all, making sure I was okay. And then he's like, well, what do you need? And I went, look, I need a lot of things. He said, leave it with me. And then 10 minutes later, he come back and he was like, listen, if you can be in my place in the next 2 hours, we might be able to see, we might be able to sort something out, which at the time I didn't know what that meant. But in the meantime, I'd been to see Gail, and she'd kind of cleaned up the sort of road rash and sort of had me, taped up and bandaged up. So I got driven out because I haven't been able to drive until sort of today, really. I got driven out by my wife to Richard Thompson's place, and we got there and looking at his new bike he had for the race, and then he went off and he walked around the corner with his box, and he goes, you should find everything you need in there. And I went, all right, what have you got? And he goes, it's a complete, Cervelo P5. So
just around the corner in the box.
So, yeah, listen, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have even been on the start line. So I know that you had a chance to share the race with me in Arizona, and I think I shared with you at the time how I felt that every time I've needed something, the universe has provided while I've been on this journey and doing these Ultraman races. And this was just another example of it. So, yeah, listen, I took that bike or all the stuff back to the bike shop, and they were kind of happy for me in one way, but then they were like, holy shit, now we've got to try and put this bike together for you before the race starts. So, yeah, that's where we ended up there.
Can you give a shout out to the people that built your bike for you?
Oh, yeah. Listen, Keith and Aaron at Trilogy Cycles in Noosa. If anyone's there, for whatever reason, racing, visiting, definitely call in and see those guys. There's a great little coffee shop next door, so you can drop your bike off, go and grab a coffee, bring them back in a coffee. And, they went above and beyond. They were amazing.
Well, that's great. You got your components thrown onto this bike, and you got something to ride. How was riding and how was swimming with these injuries that you had? What were some of the struggles you had to go through out there on the course?
Yeah, I seen Gail each day. She was redressing and doing stuff, and we kind of agreed that we would leave it until the Friday to make an assessment of where we're at. I had kind of been testing myself, prior to that, where I felt like I could put weight through the sort of, I don't know how you describe it, on the pads sort of under your thumb, if that makes sense, on your hand.
Yeah.
I felt like I could put my hands onto a table or a bench or something, and I could sort of lean and put weight through it. And I went, okay, if I can do that, at least I can sort of take weight through the bike. I could use my sort of last three fingers, and they were moving enough to be able to allow me to brake, or I felt that they would anyway. But I didn't have the bike until 5 o'clock Friday night, so I didn't know until then, to be honest. And then I went for a swim on the Friday with strapping on, which Gail was adamant that I needed to have everything covered to minimise infection. That was her biggest concern. So I swam for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then during that swim I kind of realised that I'd done something to my ribs, because every time I reached out with my left arm in the swimming action and straightened my body out, like there was something grabbing in my ribs, and I went, oh shit. But anyway, it just meant that I had to alter my stroke a little bit. And I think, I'm not the best swimmer as it is, so I didn't think it was going to be I mean, the whole thing and the whole weekend was based upon, well, if I can get out of the swim and then I'll get on the bike. If I can get back for day one, well, then we'll try again. And so we just took it bit by
stage
bit.
By stage. Yeah. Okay. So you're able to struggle through those days. Was there any day where time became a factor for you?
I guess it was always going to be day one was going to be the biggest issue. Not knowing, how I was going to be when I got out of the water, and then how much sort of, aggravating myself in the hands during the swim was going to affect getting onto the bike. So, and then just the way that my hands were wasn't allowing me to be able to take nutrition on the go like I normally would have, and for every other race, I couldn't put a bottle in, or I couldn't grab a bottle.
Your hand wasn't closing enough for you to actually grab the bottle as you drove by, so you were having to stop to do your nutrition.
Yeah, so we stopped, and I think it worked out that we had about 30 minutes of stoppages, or it might have been 25 to 30 minutes, I think, on my Garmin, something like that, of moving time on the bike. So, but we were confident that we could still get back. I can't remember the times, to be honest, because all I was worried was just making sure we got it back. But I think it was in the 11-hour bracket from memory.
Yeah.
So.
And you did a couple of things during this race to salute the people that have gone through these various races with you. And I know it was important for you to do that. So can you share what it was that you did, decorating your bike and whatnot for the people you've gone through this journey with?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to do something. I wasn't sure. And after Arizona. I had a little bit of time, and on the flight back, I was trying to coordinate to get something, and I'm like, how can I make this work? And what I come up with was to try and recognise each of the people that I'd raced with in the 6 races. So one idea was to get a shirt, and I'm like, okay, but the timelines didn't allow for that to happen. So I decided to get everyone's name in a race with printed up, and they were going to be stuck on the bike. So I'm kind of glad that I didn't have them on the bike, otherwise they would have still that bike wasn't part of the race. So timing kind of worked out. So again, on the Friday night before the race, I had Gail's husband, a couple of my paces. They were working through because my hands weren't working that well, and they were cutting up like all of the names, and then we basically plastered them all over the wheel on the bike, the disc wheel. And for those people who were in Arizona and seen the award that I was presented from Ultraman, we kind of, we got that made up into a decal and put on the disc wheel. So it allowed us to then try to put all the names on top of that. So yeah, it was a fun thing, and it got a lot of kind of people's attention, and some people were reaching out and going, oh, I can't see my name. So I was sending some people like, oh, here it is. And so then up on the handlebars and sort of in the cockpit, like I had a couple of the Australian winners like Richard Thompson and Marcus Brown. They were up the top with me. I had Armando and winners of the races like Jeremy Howard, Maxim, and stuff like that from the other races in North America.
Right.
So it was just nice to have people that I'd share that experience with, and there definitely was a few tough times, especially day 2 on the bike. You're searching for smooth roads because the vibration was causing problems.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it was very relieving and emotional to get to the day 2 finish line. I'll give you the tip.
Well, as people probably know at this point, you did make it to the finish line in under the 36 hours, and you are the first person to do 6 5:15 distance races in 12 months. I'm sure it's a feat that people are already looking at trying to better. What kind of advice would you give for people that are listening that are thinking about doing the same thing or maybe trying to do more?
You need to have a good person like Gail, a good massage, or a good person that can put you back together, because my biggest thing has been those like niggles along the way, and just having somebody that was able to keep me moving, keep me running. I guess between the races, not trying to do too much training. I guess like the very first race, I had done quite a lot of training leading into it, but there was no intention to go ahead and do what I did.
Right.
It all kind of evolved along the way. So in between races, it was just more about keeping on moving. And I don't know that you could do it and actually race them, if that makes sense. I mean, maybe someone can and someone will one day, but it became pretty clear to me it was just more about completing them and getting through. Because, there are people like we just seen with Simon who can go out and absolutely tear a course up, but I've never, and I never will be that type of athlete. So I think if you keep it in moderation, have a good support team, look after yourself, it's achievable, and more are achievable if you've got the time.
Yeah, the time and the money and the patience of your family.
Yeah, absolutely. So, none of this obviously would be possible without the support of them. So,
now looking ahead, do you think that this is something that has kind of changed you now in your life? Are you different in any way from going through this experience and meeting all these people and meeting this goal?
I think I am. You met me, I guess, the 5th race in. so you probably didn't know me before. But I think the people who have known me prior are the ones that will probably see a change. I mean, we've shared this before when we've spoken previously about meeting up with Armando, and he's like an example of the type of people that you meet within this race. I mean, me and him have got a friendship, I guess, that will last the rest of our lives now. But when you attend these races, it's a different type of person that you meet that this race attracts, and the people who keep coming back. And I think they're the type of people I'm trying to be more like, and I'm hoping that. I mean, there's times where I feel myself getting frustrated in situations that are away from Ultraman, and I'm like then trying to use my experiences from being around the people that I've met at Ultraman to be better at what I do away. I keep telling people that I meet and who ask me for advice, I say, when you're in this room, soak it up and speak to as many people as you can, because when you walk out of this room or you walk back into the real world, there's not as many people. I mean, we're all concentrated into one place for that period of time, for that race and the week before and a couple of days after. But once you go back to the real world, yeah, you're like one piece of positivity amongst everything else out there. And it's up to us to try and, find the positives, I guess, out there. It's too easy at the moment for everyone to find a negative, everywhere you look, someone can complain about something, but, don't want to accept that anymore. I want to try and be that person that finds the positive, I guess.
Well, excellent. I've got onto this train a little bit late, Shane, but I've definitely enjoyed meeting you and being a part of this journey for you and sharing it with my listeners. And I know people that are listening have really got on board with it as well. So we look forward to seeing what you do next in the future of 515 racing. And thanks once again for being on the show.
Yeah. Thanks for having us, Larry.
My next guest was the 2017 Women's Champion at Australia. So she was definitely one of the favorites going into this year's contest. Unfortunately, her body was battling against her as much as the elements were. While her time this year was a little longer than in 2017, she did move up 4 spots overall in the rankings, finishing 7th overall and holding off the second place female Ricky Anderson by just 16 minutes to take the top spot in the women's field once again with a time of 26:47. Representing the USA, though now a resident of Australia, it is your 2023 Australia Women's Champion, Dee Fuller. Welcome to the show.
Welcome. Thank you.
Did I get that time right? Because I was trying to read it off that written board. Was it 26:47?
I actually am not 100% sure. I will be completely honest in saying I didn't make time part of my goal this year, especially after getting out of the swim and recognizing that I was about 20 minutes later than I expected to be.
Okay, yeah. And when you got out of that swim, you were in second position at that time.
I was actually in third position.
Oh, third position. Okay.
There was a woman named Kelly who had come out first. She had a time just over 3 hours. I think it was about 3 hours and 3 minutes or 3 hours and 4 minutes.
Okay. That's
She
Kelly, right?
Obliterated that. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And then Ricky came out at about 3 hours and 13 minutes.
And your swim time this time was 3:21.
Correct.
Yeah. But by the end of the day, you did manage to get yourself into first place. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So you must have had a pretty good bike on that first day. Tell us a little bit about your day one.
If I go back to the swim, I can say I had a really good and brilliant first 3K, even though it was very choppy and hard water. Mm-hmm. But when we turned the buoy to head towards the 4th kilometer mark, both myself and my paddler, I think, ran into a couple of issues and hit some sea lice and got stung pretty badly in the face a couple of times, just enough to kind of knock you off what you're doing.
Yeah.
Turning the 4th and then the 5th buoy and heading back was actually the most brilliant part of the swim because we had the waves behind us pushing us in. So it was gentle and rolling, and then big and rolling, and fast and fun. And unfortunately, it wasn't like that the whole way. The last the last 3 kilometers were quite a bit of a slog, to be honest. There was a point in time in which I felt like I was very close to the buoy, turned and asked my paddler about how far away I was. She said 200 meters. And then I looked again, just to sight very quickly, and it was almost like the buoy moved 500 meters away, which is not what you want to see happening at that point in the race. So
it's like a bad horror movie where the hallway just keeps going longer and longer.
Yes, exactly. Like, oh, come on, I was there. Why am I not there? When I exited the swim, I will honestly admit, I thought that my time would be slower. So even though it wasn't the time that I had projected prior to the race, I was very pleased to get out at a 3:21. I felt like, given the conditions, given how how difficult the water was on the day, that was the best I could have produced, and yeah, I was actually quite happy with it.
And you got onto the bike and went out chasing after those 2 women in front of you. How was the day 1 bike course?
Slippery, wet,
yeah,
rainy, hilly, lots of potholes, and some very unexpected traffic lights. There was some road construction out there, and while my husband and I had driven the course and knew where those lights were, it's a gamble as to whether or not you're going to hit them or you're going to sail through. So yeah, day 1 was all about enjoying what I could enjoy and ticking the boxes, and then also making sure I got to the finish line safely.
Right. You head into day 2. You've I think it was maybe a 20-minute lead or close to that for the end of day 1. Day 2, again, not the most favorable weather. By the end of that day, you only have a 6.5 minute difference between you and Ricky. So what happened out there on day 2 that, maybe she was able to pull a little bit back on you?
So firstly, when we started in the morning, heading out to what's called the no-go zone for all crew cars, I felt fantastic, which to me is quite unusual because I will never declare myself to be a cyclist, ever. I work very hard on the bike to make it not my weakness, and I'll just leave it there. So my body system was also slightly failing me. I've had some very serious issues with my gut in the past. I've actually had surgery done on parts of my colon to reconstruct some defects, I suppose. Whether I was born that way or not, nobody can say. But it can produce an effect of being unable to clear my system appropriately, I suppose. The best way to put it.
That's okay. They're ultra people that are listening. They love a good bad stomach story.
All right. So basically, it's very difficult for me to pass gas on a bike. Let alone pee. So I found myself having to stop quite frequently to just urinate and get rid of the liquids that I was putting in. So every time I was stopped, that's basically a no speed. I'm not moving forward. So at about 180K, just after the climb out of Kenilworth, which is unfortunately something I basically had to walk up, and not part of the hill, the whole hill, because I had nothing in my legs. I got to the other side of the hill and found that bananas were my lifesaver.
Okay.
And after some bananas and Diet Pepsi, suddenly things just started to function better. And I started to fly again. And I wouldn't necessarily say I had the fierceness that I had in 2017 for the last 90 Ks of the bike ride. But I certainly had movement, including riding my bike up what looked like a river. Because we hit a point on the course where it was raining so much that this one little uphill was completely a flooded road. You could barely see the pavement. And I'm happy that I was in a positive place when I hit that, because I don't know where I would have been or what would have happened had that have been, 50 Ks earlier.
Yeah.
I would have been like, I don't want to swim on my bike. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So by the end of that day too, then, like I said, you have like a barely 6.5 minute difference between the two of you, and you're going into the 84K double marathon. That's no time at all, especially if you have to like stop for, problems with your stomach and things like that. How did you face going into day 3, and what was your strategy, and did you think you were going to be able to pull it off, or were you concerned that that's just not enough of a lead to hold on to?
There were a few moments within the first 10K that we legitimately stopped, so that I could release my guts.
Right.
I had really seriously bad diarrhea and knew that it was not going to be a 2 or 3 stop release, but more of a 10 to 15 stop. And then I thought, okay,
yeah,
we can manage it. I got to the marathon. I got to the half marathon point and thought, okay, things are settling down, feeling pretty good. Ran up the hills around Coolum, felt really strong, and felt like I was handling my nutrition really well. Got through the first marathon, feeling a little bit troubled. Again, that strange hunger in my gut that I had felt at the beginning of day 2 starting to arise. So it was like, okay, bananas worked yesterday. Let's go for bananas. And around the 50-kilometer mark, my body decided that it was done. It was done with everything. And I know I passed I passed quite a few of the athletes coming back, and each and every one of them said, "You look so strong." The reality is I look strong because of them. They, each and every one of them, were inspiring me to push through what I was going through.
Right.
And to remind myself that I can do this. I can overcome whatever my body is going to throw at me.
Mm-hmm.
And I can get there. I can get to that finish line. And there wasn't a doubt in my mind of crossing the finish line. There were a few doubts of whether or not I would hold off,
right,
not just Ricky, but any of the females, because they're all really tough athletes. And at one point, around the 60K mark, my stomach was so swollen I looked about 7 months pregnant.
Oh, geez.
And could not find anything to release it. And that's when I was vomiting every, I don't even know, a couple of 100 meters. At one point, I had things coming out both ways. At one point in time, I legitimately didn't want to pull my shorts back up because I thought, if it's going to come out, just let it all come out while I'm moving. As I made my way back in this walk, run, whatever I could use strategy, with my husband beside me, guiding me, I was eternally grateful because I was still moving. I was still going forward. About 1 kilometer away from the Noosa Bridge, which is probably then about 2.5 kilometers away from the finish line, my body released this beautiful amount of air. Which was a little shocking because I didn't expect it to do it there and then. And a little bit angering because why had it taken me that long?
Right.
But all good. I was still quite swollen when I crossed the finish line, but the crossing of that finish line this time around was more of a celebration of mind over matter and less of a celebration of winning.
Right.
I feel like there was this greater sense of achievement in sharing it, not just with my husband again, but with my stepdaughter. So it's the first time she's ever crewed or done anything like that before. Sharing that journey.
Maybe the last time after seeing what you did out there.
Yeah, quite possibly. No, I think she took pure joy out of it.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So, yeah. But I'm satisfied is the word that I use to describe how I feel in finishing this. Right. Satisfied, proud, grateful, and satisfied.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your story and telling us about your race. And, there aren't too many people out there that can say they're 2-time champions of races. So congratulations on being a 2-time champion of the Australia. And good luck with all the future races you do.
Thank you so much, Larry.
That was only a small part of the conversation that I had with Dee. During her speech at the Awards night, she told the audience that between her 2017 victory and 2023 race, that she had attempted suicide. I asked her if she wanted to talk about it, and she did. And we also discussed some of her other traumas that she faced during her life, including living with eating disorders. Since recording this, Dee has made a public post on Facebook stating that she is still struggling with eating disorders, including during the race. She was very open in our discussion, and I intended to use that conversation in a future episode, which will be around mental health. Given what she has just revealed, I am putting that on hold for now and may release it later if she still feels that she wants to share it after her most recent healing journey that she has just begun. Dee, on behalf of the entire Ohana, please take care of yourself and take the time that you need to get well again. My next guest is the 2023 men's champion of Australia, who most followers of 5:15 around the world will know as the new world record holder for the 5:15 distance. This is New Zealand's Simon Cochrane. Welcome back, Simon.
Thanks, Larry. Good to chat to you again.
Yeah. I would just like to set this up for the listener by sharing your times first. So please indulge me. I'm sure you've been hearing these quite a bit lately, but just give me a second to run through some of these amazing times that you did. Your swim time was at 2:27:04, followed by a sub-4 bike on day one at 3:57:06, which is the fastest bike time for that race. And that gave you a total time on day one of 6:24:10. Again, fastest time. In day two, you did a 7:18:30, fastest time at the race ever. And in day three, you had your first marathon done at 2:58. and finished in a time of 6:06:07, besting the previous double marathon by 23 minutes. So that gave you a total time of 19:48:47, shattering the record by over an hour and a half and making you the only person on the planet to complete a 5:15 in under 20 hours. The only segment there you didn't set a record in was the swim, and apparently you missed that by 2 minutes. How does it feel to be a person that has done something that no other human in history has ever done? I mean, has this accomplishment set in for you yet?
Yeah, I'll just correct you on one thing there. Steve Ledger rode 4 minutes quicker than me on day 2, so he's the record holder for the day 2 bike. Okay. But we both went under the record by 25 minutes. So, but apart from that, it was all spot on.
Congratulations, Steve.
Yeah, he had a very strong ride. And he also did the run, and he crashed on day 1 and had a fractured pelvis. So, yeah, solid finish for him.
Very solid finish, yeah.
Yeah.
So has this sunk in for you?
Yeah, not really. I mean, the race went as well as I could have hoped. I'm very happy with, how I managed to pull off each day, recover well, reset and go again, and managed to, I guess, fuel and recover well enough to put together a pretty solid run on day 3.
Yeah. In our previous conversation, you did say that you felt that you had trained correctly and that you fully understood the race demands in all aspects of the race. Even though this is your first time doing the distance, you've had that experience with Carl Reed. You did some really big blocks of training and not always in the best conditions, you told me. So do you feel like maybe even that played a little bit into this race for you, being able to overcome like the weather that you guys were facing?
Yeah, big time. I mean, the swim had quite a lot of swell, quite a lot of chop, so the conditions weren't overly fast there. And then both days on the bike were windy as hell, and we got some big downpours of rain. So we had slippery roads, we had a lot of debris on the road, some roadworks to contend with, and it was just raining on and off all weekend. But the temperatures were nice compared to New Zealand. So even though those conditions were rough, it was still between 18 and 22 degrees. So it was never cold. It was never too uncomfortable.
Yeah. So you must feel like you still ended up leaving a little bit of time out there due to the conditions and stuff like that. I didn't ask you previously if you had a time goal, but did you meet your time goal? Were you on track?
I never had a time goal going in. The goal was to just go as quick as I can, and I was thinking that would be under 21 hours. I was confident to do that, but I didn't think going under 20 would happen really on that course. So to go under by 12 minutes, and I also took a wrong turn on day 1 on the bike and did an extra 1.6 Ks. So there's definitely a bit more time on the table.
Yeah. Now, you felt like you were prepared, as I said, and that's a strength of yours as an athlete. Did the race throw anything at you that you weren't prepared for? Did you have to overcome anything, problem solve along the way?
No, can't say I did really. Like it did go smoothly. My crew were perfect. My wife Larissa and mum and dad and the kids were awesome out there in the car, supplying me with nutrition at exactly the right spots with directions and a bit of motivation. And then my 3 run paces on the Monday were spot on, same thing, carrying 2 of my bottles, so I had the exact nutrition I wanted when I wanted, and a bit of local course knowledge, which helped with knowing what was coming up with the hills and the slippery paths and corners and that sort of thing. So I would say it went as smoothly as I was hoping.
Excellent, yeah. Now, you're not the first pro triathlete to challenge the 5:15 distance, I mean, especially on the female side. Do you think that there are more people in the pro field that may want to or that should give this distance a go, maybe inspired by your success?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I hope it becomes a bit more of a competitive race. I mean, I'd like to race some other guys again. It was a shame that a couple of the other top guys didn't quite have the races they wanted and pulled out, I think, on day 1 and day 2. So, yeah, bit of a shame there.
Yeah. And that was Richard Thompson, I think, who pulled out on day 2, was it? He wasn't feeling well? Yeah. And who was it on day one?
Another Australian guy, Nathan, who, was ranked fairly highly for this race too.
Mm. So did you find it hard being out front without somebody pushing you along the way? I mean, and obviously in your Ironman races, there's always going to be someone around you. What was it like to be out there without someone pushing you?
No, I came into this race pretty well focused to get the most out of myself each day. So no, the internal motivation was there. I was ready to hurt for 3 days if someone was an hour up the road or an hour behind.
Well, a lot of people listen to this podcast for the stories of the people involved and for the tips that they can get to get through the distance themselves. As a coach at Athletic Peak, what would be your number one piece of advice that you would give an athlete preparing to do this distance?
Yeah, I think needing to get some of the bigger one-day training sessions or back-to-back day training sessions in. Just chatting to a few of the other athletes there, I was quite surprised that I talked to a couple of guys and their longest swims had only been around 5Ks. And when you're talking a 10K open water swim, like that is a big step up when you haven't done, at least 8, 9, or even a 10K swim. And same with the bike and run. I mean, if you're looking to complete it, then yep, that's fine. But if you're looking to compete, you're needing to put a bit more volume into the body, and also to test nutrition over those longer sessions and days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how was your swim? Like when you get in those open water swims, sometimes a 10K swim can become 11K if you don't have the right guide or the currents are pushing you around. What was your Garmin reading or what you use?
Yeah, it was about 10.2K, so I was pretty happy with that. And the time, I think, was bang on. I mean, if you take that 200 meters off, I probably would have got the record, but it is what it is. There was quite a bit of current and swell out there, so all in all, I have to be happy with that.
Yeah. And I'm sure we just talked about you coaching at Athletic Peak, and that maybe people that have been following you now at the race are wondering if you're taking on clients right now.
Yeah, I've had a few inquiries this week, and do have a few spots left. But starting to get quite busy. But always feel free to reach out, and we'll see if we can help out in any way.
Excellent. So what's next for you then? Are you going to be tuning up for your next Ironman season? I know you talked about wanting to do some of the other ultra marathons like Badwater. What's going to be the next big goal for you?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, obviously I'd love to go and race Ultraman Hawaii later this year, but it seems that there's a bit of politics into the qualification process around Ultraman Australia and whether it's an official qualifier and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I feel I deserve to be on that start line to race the best in Hawaii this year. Otherwise, there's so many other awesome events out there that I can aim towards. I'd still love to race some Ironman this year, but also maybe some multi-day running events even, and have a crack at some of those.
Oh, excellent. Well, I'm sure you've got a whole bunch of new followers now that will be trying to see what your next exploits are. Thank you once again for coming and telling us about your race and even in the preview race. It was great speaking with you, the new world record champion of 5:15 distance, Simon Cochrane of New Zealand. Thanks again.
Thank you. Good chat.
Hey, if you liked what you heard today, please tell a friend and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'd appreciate it if you'd rate and review the show while you're there. Drop the names of the people you think we should interview and we'll get in touch with them and make that happen. Thank you for listening to 5:15, the Ultra Podcast, a production of 5-5 Enterprises. Now really, go subscribe now before you forget.